The fluorescent lights of Patterson Hardware hummed their industrial hymn as Marcus Bennett ran his calloused palm across the grain of a 2x4, checking for warps the way his father had taught him. Sawdust clung to his jeans in a fine coating that marked him as clearly as any uniform, a tradesman in a world that increasingly valued degrees over skill. His daughter Lily crouched beside him in the lumber aisle, 8 years old and already able to spot a twisted board from 3 feet away, humming tunelessly the way her mother used to when concentrating on a task. That familiar ache settled behind his ribs, the one that came whenever he noticed how much of Sarah remained in their daughter, despite 2 years of absence. The phoenix tattoo on his left wrist caught the overhead light as Marcus marked measurements with a carpenter's pencil, its wings spread in eternal ascent from stylized flames. He tugged his sleeve down from habit, covering the design that had once meant everything and now felt like a scar that refused to fade. Some mistakes you could sand away. Others branded themselves into your skin and waited there, patient as wood rot, for the exact wrong moment to remind you they existed. A small voice cut through the Saturday afternoon murmur of power tool demonstrations and paint color consultations, clear and certain in a way that made grown men's hearts stop. "Excuse me, sir, my mother has a tattoo exactly like yours." Marcus froze mid-measurement, the pencil slipping from fingers that suddenly forgot how to grip. The box of 3-inch deck screws he'd been holding hit the concrete floor with a metallic scatter, ball bearings of possibility rolling away in every direction. Time performed that peculiar contortion it does before catastrophe, stretching seconds into something geological, while his mind raced through impossible calculations. The phoenix design on his wrist wasn't from any tattoo parlor's flash wall. He and exactly one other person had sketched it together on a coffee-stained napkin a decade ago. Two kids drunk on the kind of love that feels like drowning and flying simultaneously. They'd gotten the ink the night before she left for New York, with promises that dissolved like sugar in rain. 3 weeks later, she had stopped answering his calls, blocked his number, and vanished so completely he sometimes wondered if he'd imagined the entire relationship. A little girl stood there, maybe 9 years old, pointing at his exposed wrist with the kind of certainty that comes before children learn to doubt what they see. She wore a navy dress with a white Peter Pan collar that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget, her dark curls escaping from a Burberry headband in a way that suggested someone had styled them carefully that morning. Patent leather shoes reflected the fluorescence without a scuff mark visible, and her posture held a trained quality, shoulders back, chin level, weight distributed evenly, like someone had taught her that presentation mattered more than comfort. But her eyes were his exact shade of hazel green, the color Sarah used to call sea glass after a storm, and they studied him with an intensity that felt like recognition. Lily tugged at his sleeve with confusion creasing her freckled face. "Dad, that girl's staring at us." Marcus glanced up properly then, taking in the full picture of wealth and isolation the child presented. The dress wasn't just expensive, it was the kind of expensive that came with boarding school uniforms and trust fund meetings. Her hands were clean in a way that suggested she'd never helped her father sand a cabinet or paint a fence. Never learned that dirt under your fingernails meant you'd built something worth having. Lily, never one to let awkwardness fester, waved with the easy friendliness of a child raised on playgrounds and public schools. "Hi, I'm Lily. Do you need help finding something?" The girl took 3 measured steps forward, her footfalls silent on the concrete despite the hard soles of those perfect shoes. When she spoke, her voice carried the careful enunciation of expensive speech therapy and private tutors, each syllable placed with the precision of someone used to being corrected. "Hello, my name is Emma." She paused, glanced toward the front of the store where a black Mercedes SUV idled visibly through the plate glass windows, then continued with something that sounded rehearsed. "My name is Emma Hartley." There was a quality to the introduction that suggested mirror practice, as if she'd been taught that names were currency and pronunciation mattered. Lily, blessedly immune to social pretension, grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled him to standing, with the easy strength of a kid who climbed trees and hauled lumber. "This is my dad. He's building me a treehouse. Do you have a treehouse?" The question came out with genuine interest, the kind that assumed everyone's childhood included hammer safety lessons and learning to read a tape measure. Emma shook her head slowly, and for a moment something vulnerable crossed her features, the universal look of childhood loneliness that transcended tax brackets and trust funds. We have gardens, but no trees strong enough yet. Mother says they need more time to grow. The formal mother, instead of mom, told Marcus everything he needed to know about the distance between Emma's world and theirs. Her gaze drifted back to his wrist, where his sleeve had ridden up again during Lily's enthusiastic pulling, and she went very still in a way that made the air feel thick. Someone 3 aisles over dropped a can of paint with a sharp clatter that echoed through the hardware cathedral. The fluorescent lights continued their monotonous hum. Marcus felt time slow down in that peculiar way it does when you recognize the moment your life is about to split in two, before and after. When the foundation you have built your existence on reveals itself to be nothing but sand and good intentions. Emma took another step closer, her focus locked on the Phoenix design with an expression that cycled through recognition, wonder, and something that looked dangerously like hope. When she spoke again, her voice came out smaller, uncertain in a way her previous careful pronunciation hadn't been. "Hello, sir." The formal address felt wrong coming from someone so young, another marker of her isolated upbringing. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours, the phoenix with the broken wing that learned to fly again." The specificity of the description hit Marcus like a 2x4 to the solar plexus. Not just a bird or a phoenix. She knew the story behind the design, the metaphor they'd chosen together about rising from failure and learning to soar despite damage. His vision narrowed to a pinpoint, peripheral details falling away until only Emma existed in his awareness. This impossible child with his eyes in someone else's wealth, pointing at proof that the past never stayed buried, no matter how deep you thought you dug the grave. Footsteps approached now, rapid and expensive, designer heels clicking in urgent rhythm against linoleum. The sound burrowed into Marcus's bones and waited there, dormant but recognizable, the way certain voices could reach through a decade of silence and trigger muscle memory in your chest cavity. "Emma, Emma, where did you—" The voice cut off mid-sentence as if someone had physically seized the speaker's throat, and Marcus knew it before he turned. Some sounds brand themselves into your nervous system and lie in wait until circumstance resurrects them with surgical precision. He rotated slowly, giving his body time to prepare for impact his mind had already absorbed. 10 years had refined Victoria's sharp edges into something almost dangerous. The ratty art student with paint permanently embedded under her fingernails had transformed into a woman whose charcoal suit probably cost what he made in a month, whose severely cut bob-framed cheekbones that stress and time had honed into weapons. But her eyes, those particular shade of gray that reminded him of October skies before rain, hadn't changed their basic architecture, even if they currently held enough trapped terror to fill a courtroom. "Marcus?" His name left her lips like a confession extracted under duress, like a curse spoken by someone who'd sworn to forget the language, like the final word of a prayer she'd been reciting silently for a decade, without realizing her mouth still remembered the shape of it. Victoria. He tasted her name after 10 years of not speaking it aloud, and it felt like pressing his tongue against a scar that had never properly healed, all nerve endings still raw beneath tissue-thin covering. Lily pressed closer to his side, confused by the adult tension that had turned the air thick enough to measure with calipers. Emma looked between them with her small face creased in the kind of worry children develop when they sense complications beyond their comprehension, but can't name the specific danger. Victoria recovered first, her features smoothing into a mask of polite distance that probably served her well in boardrooms and charity galas. "I apologize. Iris, we need to leave now." But Emma was looking at the tattoo again, then at her mother, then back to Marcus with the dawning wonder of a child piecing together a puzzle adults thought they'd hidden well enough to fool someone who noticed everything. "Mother, is he the one? From your bedtime story? The man who builds beautiful things with his hands? The other phoenix who learned to fly?" Victoria's face went pale beneath expensive makeup that couldn't quite conceal the shadows under her eyes. Marcus felt something fundamental crack inside his chest, not clean like breaking kindling, but messy like splitting green wood against the grain, all splinters and resistance. "What story?" His voice came out barely above a whisper, rough with a decade of questions he'd taught himself to stop asking. But Victoria was already moving, already taking Emma's hand with the desperate grace of someone fleeing a crime scene where they'd left too much evidence behind. I'm sorry, we have to go. I'm sorry. She pivoted towards the exit with practiced efficiency, pulling Emma along, but the girl twisted to look back over her shoulder with those hazel green eyes that Marcus now recognized from every morning he looked in the mirror to shave. The shape of her nose, the way her eyebrows arched with that particular stubborn set, the jawline that announced itself even through childhood's softness, all of it added up to an equation whose solution detonated every carefully constructed wall he'd built around the past 10 years. Lily's voice came small and uncertain beside him, breaking through the static in his head. Dad, who was that lady? Why did she run away like that? Marcus couldn't answer because he was too busy calculating, counting backward, remembering the last night he'd spent with Victoria before she disappeared. The hotel room 3 states away, where they'd said goodbye with bodies instead of words. The rain against windows sounding like applause or accusation, depending on how you chose to hear it. The promises they'd made about phone calls and plane tickets and making the distance work despite her prestigious gallery position and his family business anchoring him to a place she'd already mentally left. 9 months. Emma was 9 years old. The arithmetic was brutally simple, even for someone whose formal education had ended with an associate degree in applied carpentry. Conception would place them at December 2015, which aligned perfectly with that final weekend together, with the tattoos still fresh and tender on their wrists, with the naive belief that matching ink meant something permanent in a world where permanence was just another comfortable lie people told themselves. The implications weren't just apocalyptic, they were surgical in their precision, cutting through every assumption he'd built his life around with the clean efficiency of a sharp blade against softwood. Marcus moved through the next 3 days in a fog so thick it felt physical, his hands performing familiar tasks while his mind spun in useless circles like a drill bit against metal it couldn't penetrate. He finished the treehouse measurements with Lily chattering beside him about school and friends and whether pink or purple paint would look better on the platform they'd be building. He guided her through homework with the patient repetition of someone who'd learned that fractions made more sense when you demonstrated them with actual woodcuts. He prepared meals he barely tasted, going through motions that muscle memory handled, while his conscious mind remained stuck in that hardware store aisle, watching Victoria flee like he represented some kind of existential threat. The phoenix tattoo on his wrist caught his attention at odd moments, while washing dishes, while measuring cabinet angles in his workshop, while lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at ceiling shadows that looked like accusations. He'd gotten the design with Victoria when they were 26 and stupid enough to believe love conquered geography and ambition. 2 kids who thought matching tattoos meant forever without understanding that forever was a luxury neither of them could afford. She'd left for that gallery position in New York the next day with promises that dissolved faster than the swelling around their fresh ink. He'd offered to follow, to relocate his entire existence for her, but she'd refused with logic that had made sense at the time. His life was here, his family's carpentry business was here, his roots went too deep to transplant on a whim. 3 weeks later, the phone call stopped. The texts went unanswered. Her social media accounts disappeared overnight like she'd been erased from digital existence by some algorithm designed to remove inconvenient history. So Marcus had done what people do when catastrophe visits without explanation. He'd grieved with the confused intensity of someone losing a limb they didn't know they could function without. He'd moved forward because staying still felt like drowning. He'd met Sarah 6 months later at a woodworking exhibition where she'd admired a rocking chair he'd built, and they'd talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing until he realized that conversation could feel like coming home instead of constantly leaving. Sarah had been steady where Victoria was storm, present where Victoria was always half absent, even when physically beside him. They'd built something real together. Marriage, mortgage, a daughter whose arrival 2 years in had taught Marcus what his father meant about love, that grounds you instead of unmooring you from everything familiar. When the cancer diagnosis came 4 years later, Sarah had fought with the quiet ferocity of someone who refused to waste energy on why me questions or dramatic pronouncements. She'd simply lived with intention until living became impossible, and she'd made him promise to continue doing the same after she was gone. He'd kept that promise mostly, learning to be both parents at once for Lily's sake, building furniture during school hours and attending recitals in the evenings, teaching his daughter that grief was something you carried rather than something you got over. But now Victoria and a 9-year-old girl with his face and a stranger's wealth, pointing at proof that some secrets are too big to stay buried regardless of how much time passes or how carefully you think you've moved on. The problem was the not knowing. If Emma was his daughter, and every cell in his body screamed confirmation, despite lacking any concrete evidence beyond resemblance and timing, then why had Victoria kept it hidden? Why disappear completely instead of having a single conversation that would have changed the trajectory of 3 lives? He'd loved Victoria once with the kind of intensity that feels like drowning and flying simultaneously. And when she left, he'd understood it as incompatibility rather than betrayal. People wanted different things, built different lives, and sometimes the timing just didn't align. That was adult wisdom, hard-earned and sensible. But this wasn't adult wisdom. This was surgical excision, the kind of calculated removal that required planning and sustained effort, the complete erasure of his existence from his own child's life without consultation or explanation. Lily found him in the workshop on the 3rd night, sitting on the floor with an unfinished drawer in his lap, and tears he hadn't realized he was crying, sliding down his face in silent tracks. She climbed into his lap without asking permission, 8 years old and already wise enough to know when silence was the only gift that mattered, when presence meant more than questions or reassurances. They sat like that for a long time, surrounded by the smell of cedar and old varnish, while the late autumn darkness pressed against the windows like something with weight and intention. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice thoughtful in the way of children processing adult complications they sense but can't fully name. "I like that girl, Emma. She seemed really lonely." Marcus's throat was too constricted for immediate response, so he just audited against the top of Lily's head and held her tighter. "Do you think we'll see her again?" Lily continued with the careful tone of someone testing how much honesty a conversation could hold. "I hope so. I've always wanted a sister." The words hit him like a mallet against a chisel, that concentrated force that either splits wood clean or shatters it into useless splinters, depending on grain and angle. Lily couldn't possibly know what she was saying, couldn't have any context for the implications her innocent wish carried. But children had a way of seeing truths adults tried desperately to hide, and Lily had always been particularly perceptive about the emotional architecture underlying surface interactions. Marcus managed to find his voice, though it came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by everything he couldn't yet articulate. "Baby, life doesn't always give us what we want." Lily leaned back to look at him properly, her green eyes, Sarah's eyes, a completely different shade than his own hazel, serious beyond her years. "Mommy used to say that sometimes life gives us what we need instead, but we have to be brave enough to see it." The discovery came accidentally on Saturday morning when Marcus was at the farmer's market with Lily, buying tomatoes for the sauce Sarah had taught him to make during their too-short marriage. He'd been examining heirloom varieties with the focused attention he applied to wood grain when he saw her, Victoria in jeans and a simple white blouse that probably still cost $600, studying vegetables with the same intense focus she used to apply to her paintings back when she'd been poor enough that art supplies represented a significant budget line item. No Emma visible, no nanny hovering with protective vigilance. Just Victoria alone among the produce stalls, looking younger somehow, without the armor of expensive suits and severe haircuts, closer to the woman he'd known before ambition and money transformed her into someone he barely recognized in that hardware store. His feet were moving before his brain fully processed the decision, navigating between stalls selling honey and handmade soap with Lily's hand clasped in his. "Baby, go look at those pastries for a minute. Pick one out for later." He pressed a $10 bill into her palm and watched her bounce toward the bakery stall before turning back to where Victoria stood frozen by the tomatoes, her eyes closed like she was praying for divine intervention or instant teleportation or any outcome other than this confrontation she'd been avoiding for 3 days. "We need to talk." Marcus kept his voice low enough that nearby shoppers couldn't eavesdrop, but firm enough that refusal wasn't really an option. Victoria's eyes opened slowly, and the grief he saw there looked old enough to have calcified into something permanent, the kind of sorrow that becomes structural rather than temporary. There's nothing to discuss. The words came out steady, but her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly as she placed a tomato back in its basket with excessive care, like proper vegetable handling represented the only controllable element in a situation spiraling beyond management. Marcus felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp in a way he'd trained himself to avoid, because rage in his business meant mistakes that cost fingers, or worse. Nothing to discuss? Victoria, she looks exactly like me. Exactly. And you ran the second we met. You don't think I deserve an explanation? Something shifted in Victoria's face, a muscle in her jaw working like she was grinding words between her molars before they could escape. What do you want me to say? The question hung between them, loaded with implications and accusations neither had the energy to fully articulate. An elderly woman at the adjacent stall glanced over with unconcealed interest, sensing drama in the making. Marcus lowered his voice further, stepping into Victoria's space with controlled intensity. I want you to tell me the truth. Is Emma mine? For a moment, he thought she might actually answer honestly, thought he saw her defenses crack enough to let reality through. Then her expression shuttered completely, every vulnerable element locked behind a mask that probably cost her as much to maintain as her designer wardrobe. Does it matter? You have your life, Marcus. I have mine. We're strangers who happen to shop at the same farmer's market. That's all. She tried to move past him, but Marcus shifted to block her path, not aggressively, but with enough presence that she'd have to physically push him aside to escape. Desperation made his voice raw. The tattoo, Victoria. Emma knows about the tattoo. She told me you told her stories about phoenixes learning to fly together. Something cracked in Victoria's facade, just a flash, barely visible, but he'd loved her once and still knew how to read the fault lines in her composure. Raw pain leaked through for maybe 2 seconds before she rebuilt the walls with visible effort. I need you to leave us alone. The whisper came out breaking now, careful control dissolving like sugar in water. Please, Marcus, I'm begging you. You don't understand what's at stake here. Before he could respond, before he could press for actual answers instead of cryptic warnings, Lily's voice rang out bright and clear across the market stalls, cutting through their standoff with the oblivious joy of childhood. Dad! Dad, look who I found! Marcus's heart executed a complicated arrhythmia. Lily was walking toward them hand in hand with Emma, both girls carrying paper bags from the bakery and wearing matching grins that suggested they'd bonded over croissants and shared loneliness in the way children could when adults stopped interfering. Emma, I can't believe you're here. Her nanny brought her to get bread. Can she come play at our house? Please? Emma looked up at Victoria with those hazel green eyes, his eyes, undeniably and obviously his eyes, filled with such hopeful longing it made Marcus's chest constrict. Mother, can I? Lily says they're building a treehouse. I could help. Victoria looked between the two girls and Marcus watched 10 years of carefully constructed wall crumble in real time with visible structural failure. Her shoulders sagged first, then her breathing shortened, and when she finally met his gaze, he saw surrender there, mixed with terror, and something that might have been relief struggling against better judgment. 1 hour. Her voice barely carried across the space between them. You can visit for 1 hour. Then Catherine comes to collect you. Emma let out a whoop of delight that sounded so much like Lily's particular brand of unfiltered joy, it was almost physically painful. As the girls ran ahead toward Marcus's truck, chattering about tree houses and whether pink or purple paint looked better for castle walls, Victoria grabbed his arm with fingers that felt cold even in the warm morning air. Marcus, She stopped, swallowed hard, tried again with visible effort. There are things you don't know, things I can't explain yet, but please, please be careful with her. She's more fragile than she seems. Marcus studied her face, really looked at it for the first time in a decade, and saw the shadows under her eyes that expensive concealer couldn't quite hide, the fine lines that hadn't existed before, the weight of secrets that had carved themselves into her features like water-cutting stone. I need to know the truth, Victoria. Whatever it is, whatever happened 10 years ago, I need to know. She held his gaze for a long moment, and he watched her fight with herself, saw the instant she made some internal decision that cost her visible effort. Come to my house tonight, after the girls are asleep. I'll tell you everything. She pulled out a business card, thick expensive stock that read Victoria Hartley, CEO, the Hartley Foundation, and wrote an address on the back with handwriting that had become more controlled than the loose artistic scrawl he remembered. 8 o'clock. Come alone. The hour with the girls was simultaneously wonderful and agonizing in ways Marcus couldn't have predicted. Harper and Emma clicked immediately, their laughter filling his backyard as they helped measure lumber for the treehouse platform with an enthusiasm that transcended their different upbringings. Emma had clearly never used a hammer before. Her grip was all wrong, her swing tentative, but she approached each nail with the serious concentration of someone used to mastering difficult things through sheer determination and repetitive practice. She asked careful questions about measurements and weight distribution with vocabulary more advanced than Lily's. Phrases like load-bearing capacity and structural integrity that suggested either extensive reading or exposure to adult conversations about engineering principles. But when Lily showed her how to draw plans in the dirt with a stick, abandoning precision for imagination, Emma's face lit up with unguarded joy that transformed her from miniature adult into actual child. Marcus watched them together and felt something fundamental shift in his chest cavity. Some piece of his understanding of reality clicking into a new configuration. They moved the same way, tilted their heads at identical angles when thinking through problems, bit their lower lips with matching concentration. Lily's coloring came from Sarah, that auburn hair and fair skin scattered with freckles, while Emma was darker like Victoria with olive complexion and near black curls. But underneath the surface differences, the architecture was identical. The shape of their hands as they gripped tools, the way they both huffed impatiently when things didn't work on the first attempt, the stubborn set of their shoulders when committing to a task. They could have been sisters. They were sisters. The certainty settled into Marcus's bones with the weight of absolute knowledge. The kind of understanding that bypasses rational thought and plugs directly into instinct. However they'd gotten here, whatever mistakes and choices had led to this moment, these two girls were connected by blood and now apparently by instant mutual affection that transcended logic. When Catherine arrived, a stern-looking woman in her 60s who introduced herself as Emma's nanny and shot Marcus a look that suggested she was memorizing his face for future identification in a police lineup. Emma hugged Lily goodbye with the fierce desperation of someone who'd found water in a desert and was being forced to leave it behind before drinking their fill. "Can we do this again?" Emma's voice carried a pleading note that made Marcus want to promise impossible things just to keep that hopeful expression on her face. "Please," Lily answered before Marcus could navigate the complex adult politics of the situation. "Yes, tomorrow. We can work on the treehouse every day until it's done." Emma's smile could have powered the electrical grid of a small city. She climbed into the Mercedes SUV, still beaming, face pressed against the rear window as Catherine drove away with professional efficiency, hand waving frantically until they turned the corner and disappeared from view. Lily stood beside Marcus in companionable silence for a moment before speaking with the thoughtful tone she used when processing complex emotions. "I really like her, Dad. She's lonely like me after Mom died. But different lonely, like she's never had anyone." Marcus pulled his daughter against his side, grateful for her perception even as it complicated everything. "Yeah, baby, I think you're right about that." His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Victoria that he read while Lily gathered scattered tools. "Thank you for today, for giving her something I can't. Tonight you'll understand why I did what I did. Whether you'll forgive me, that's another question entirely." Marcus looked at Lily, at the tree house they were building together, at the phoenix tattoo on his wrist that had burned like a brand for 10 years without him understanding why the scar ran so deep. He typed back with thumbs that felt clumsy against the small screen. 8 o'clock, I'll be there. On the address Victoria had given him led to a neighborhood Marcus had only driven through en route to somewhere else, the kind of place where houses hid behind stone walls and ancient trees, where money didn't announce itself because it didn't need validation from anyone equipped to notice. The gate opened automatically as he approached, clearly programmed to expect him, And Marcus followed a winding drive through manicured grounds to a modern masterpiece of glass and steel that probably appeared in architectural magazines under headlines about sustainable luxury. This wasn't gallery curator money. This wasn't even successful career money. This was generational wealth, the kind that came with trust funds and board positions and lawyers who specialized in protecting assets from people who might deserve access. The confirmation settled into his stomach like concrete. Victoria answered the door herself, barefoot in jeans and an oversized cashmere sweater that probably cost what he made in a week, but looked comfortable rather than performative. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders in a way he hadn't seen since college. And for a disorienting moment, she looked younger, closer to the woman he'd known before money and secrets transformed her into someone he barely recognized. "Come in. Emma's asleep. Third floor. She won't hear us." Victoria stepped aside to let him enter a foyer that was more art gallery than home, with soaring ceilings and carefully curated paintings Marcus recognized from museums. Actual Rothkos and Basquiat's and O'Keeffe's, not reproductions. Sculptures that probably cost more than his house occupied strategic positions like sentries guarding against intrusion. She led him through the architectural marvel to a study lined with first edition books, poured them both whiskey from a crystal decanter without asking if he wanted it, and handed him a glass with fingers that shook despite her visible attempts at control. They stood like that for a moment in loaded silence, while the weight of 10 years pressed down on the space between them with measurable force. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice flat with the careful control of someone who'd rehearsed these words until they became divorced from emotion. Her name is Emma Catherine Hartley, born March 14, 2016, at Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. She likes mathematics and art in equal measure, plays violin at pre-conservatory level, speaks English, French, and Italian, has never had a birthday party with more than 2 other children present. She paused, took a long drink of whiskey, continued with mechanical precision. She's also never met her father, has no idea who he is, and I've spent 9 years making absolutely certain it stayed that way. The words were clearly designed to hurt, and they succeeded with surgical precision. Marcus set his untouched whiskey down because his hands were shaking too badly to hold glass safely. Why? It was the only question that mattered, the singular word that contained every other interrogation he could possibly construct. Victoria finally turned to face him fully, and the raw anguish in her expression made him take an involuntary step forward before he caught himself. "Because telling you would have destroyed everything, for both of us, for all of us." She set down her own glass and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking small in the oversized sweater, despite the massive room and wealth surrounding them. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after leaving you, January 2016. Convenience store bathroom at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep, kept vomiting, couldn't pretend it was stress anymore." Her voice cracked slightly, and she paused to collect herself with visible effort. "I sat on that filthy floor with the test in my hand and thought about calling you. God, Marcus, I had my phone out 100 times. But then I did what I always do when facing impossible decisions. I researched. I looked you up online, checked your social media for the first time since leaving because I'd been avoiding it like touching a fresh burn." She met his eyes, and hers were swimming now with tears she was fighting to contain. "You were with Sarah. There were photos from that woodworking exhibition. The way you looked at her, Marcus, so at peace, so fundamentally happy in a way you never looked with me. And I knew it was real." Marcus felt like the floor had dropped away, leaving him suspended over nothing by force of will alone. "You were pregnant with my child and didn't tell me because I'd started seeing someone?" The anger in his voice was sharp enough to cut, but underneath it was something more complicated. Because he remembered those early days with Sarah, and Victoria wasn't entirely wrong about what she'd seen. Victoria laughed, but it came out bitter and broken. "Not just seeing someone. You'd found what you needed, what I could never give you. Sarah was everything I wasn't, steady, present, content with a life that had roots instead of wings. I was chaos and ambition, and I would have pulled you away from everything that anchored you to sanity. I would have demanded you choose between me and the business your grandfather built, between our child and the life you'd carefully constructed. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes like she could physically push the tears back into whatever reservoir she'd been storing them in for 9 years. So I made a calculation. Cold and practical, and I've lived with the guilt of it every single day. But Marcus, look at what Emma has. Look at what Lily has. They both got childhoods without their parents destroying each other over custody arrangements and money and divided loyalties. I gave you permission to love Sarah completely, to build something real without me hanging over it like a ghost you couldn't quite exorcise. That was my gift to you, however brutal, the wrapping. The silence that followed pressed against Marcus's eardrums with physical weight. Victoria stood across from him in this fortress of wealth she'd built from choices that excluded him, and he understood with sudden clarity that forgiveness wasn't a binary switch, but a complicated negotiation between what hurt and what made terrible sense when examined from enough angles. You decided for me. His voice came out quieter than intended, drained of the anger that had sustained him through the drive here. You took away my choice completely. Victoria nodded slowly, accepting the accusation without defense. I know. I've carried that guilt like a second skeleton. All these bones I can't shed no matter how much therapy I pay for or how many times I tell myself it was the right decision. Marcus crossed to the window overlooking grounds that probably required a full-time landscaping crew, putting distance between them while his mind processed implications that kept multiplying like compound interest. You said there were things I didn't understand, things at stake, so tell me the rest because this, he gestured at the study with its first editions and original art. This isn't gallery curator money. You said your family had wealth, but you were trying to build something separate from it. What changed? Victoria refilled both their glasses, despite neither having finished the first pour, buying time with ritual. My father died 6 months after Emma was born. Heart attack while reviewing quarterly reports. Very on-brand for a man who treated emotions like accounting errors to be corrected. He left me everything. The Hartley Foundation, $200 million in liquid assets, real estate holdings across 3 states, art collections that museums begged to borrow. She returned to her chair with movements that suggested bone-deep exhaustion rather than physical grace. But there were conditions. Trust structures written by my father and his father before that, ironclad legal frameworks designed to control heirs from beyond the grave. They had specific requirements about suitable lineage and appropriate partnerships, because apparently even death doesn't stop wealthy men from trying to micromanage their bloodlines. The ice in Marcus's stomach spread outward toward his extremities. What kind of conditions? Victoria met his eyes with an expression that mixed shame and defiance in equal measure. If I had a child with someone deemed unsuitable, no college degree, working class background, no documented family history of achievement or wealth accumulation, I would forfeit the entire inheritance. Every dollar would be redistributed to cousins who'd already made it clear they'd dismantle everything my father spent his life building. Her hands tightened around the crystal glass. The legal team spelled it out very clearly when I called them from that bathroom floor at 2 in the morning. They had private investigators ready to assess any potential father's background, financial records going back 3 generations, verification that he met the bloodline purity standards my ancestors apparently valued more than human decency. Marcus felt his jaw clench hard enough to make his molars ache. So you chose the money over telling me I had a daughter. I chose Emma's future. The words came out fierce enough that Victoria immediately seemed to regret the volume, glancing toward the ceiling as if Emma might materialize through 3 floors and closed doors. When she continued, it was quieter but no less intense. Without that trust, I would have been a single mother working gallery jobs for $40,000 a year, scraping by in a studio apartment, unable to afford the medical care Emma needs or the education that's given her every advantage. You were building something real with Sarah, Marcus. You would have been torn between 2 families, 2 children, never fully present for either. I did the math, cold and brutal, and I've hated myself for it every day. But the equation kept coming out the same. Telling you would have destroyed 3 lives for the sake of honesty that served no one. The logic was airtight even as it made Marcus want to put his fist through the antique desk between them. Victoria had performed a cost-benefit analysis on his daughter's existence, and decided the numbers justified silence, had weighed his right to know against financial security, and chosen pragmatism over transparency. The terrible part was understanding how she'd arrived at that conclusion, seeing the twisted rationality that made it almost defensible from certain angles. Did Sarah know? The question emerged before Marcus fully realized he was asking it, but suddenly he needed the answer more than his next breath. Victoria's expression shifted to something that looked like relief mixed with fresh grief. Not at first, but 3 years ago when Emma was 6, I ran into her. Medical conference in Boston. I was there for a foundation board meeting. She was there for experimental treatment trials. She paused, studying Marcus's face for reaction before continuing. She recognized me from old photos you'd apparently kept. We talked for hours in a hospital cafeteria while you were home with Lily, and I told her everything. The pregnancy, the trust conditions, the choice I'd made. Marcus's vision narrowed to a pinpoint, every sound in the room suddenly too loud. What did she say? Victoria's voice dropped to barely audible. She said he would have chosen you and the baby, and he would have spent the rest of his life wondering if he'd made the right choice, resenting one family while with the other, never fully committed to either. By not telling him, you gave him permission to love me completely without guilt. Thank you for that gift. The words landed like physical blows, each syllable a revelation that recontextualized his entire marriage. Sarah had known. For the last year of her life, during the worst of the treatments and the increasing certainty that time was running out, she'd carried this secret with the same quiet determination she'd applied to everything else. And she'd apparently blessed it, had seen Victoria's silence as protection rather than betrayal. Marcus found himself sitting without remembering the decision to do so, his legs simply refusing to support his weight under the accumulating revelations. She never said anything. Not once, not even when his throat closed around the rest of that thought, the deathbed conversations they'd had about legacy and moving forward and not letting grief turn him into a ghost in his own house. She made me promise. Victoria was crying openly now, no longer attempting to maintain composure. Promise that after she was gone, I'd wait. Wait until Lily was old enough to handle complexity, until you'd healed enough to think clearly, until the timing felt less catastrophic. She said the truth has its own schedule, and forcing it never ends well. Her laugh came out wet and broken. She was supposed to have more time. We were supposed to have another year at least to figure out the right approach. Then she died and I panicked and just kept waiting, kept telling myself next month or next year, until waiting became its own decision and I'd trapped myself in a silence I didn't know how to break. The study fell quiet except for the antique clock on the mantel, ticking away seconds that felt weighted with significance. Marcus tried to imagine Sarah in that hospital cafeteria, already dying but still thinking about his happiness, blessing Victoria's deception because she understood him well enough to predict exactly how he would have reacted to the truth a decade ago. She'd been right, which somehow made it worse. At 26, he would have tried to do the right thing, would have attempted to be present for both children and succeeded at neither, would have turned himself inside out trying to honor contradictory responsibilities until the strain cracked something fundamental in his personality. How long were you planning to wait? His voice came out scraped raw by everything he couldn't fully process yet. Victoria wiped her face with the back of her hand in a gesture so unlike her usual controlled polish, it felt jarring. Until Emma turned 10, March 14th, 3 months from now. That's when the trust conditions expire. At 10, she's legally recognized as the sole heir, regardless of paternity documentation. I'd be protected, the inheritance would be secure, and I could finally tell her the truth without risking everything I'd built to provide for her. She paused, then added with bitter precision, I had a plan, a therapist lined up to help us through the revelation, legal documents prepared to establish your parental rights, even a script for how to explain it in age-appropriate language. 3 months. I was 3 months away from fixing this myself before you walked into that hardware store, and my daughter recognized a tattoo I'd been stupid enough to tell her stories about. Marcus processed this new information, turning it over like examining wood for structural integrity. You've been telling her about me, about the Phoenix. I had to give her something. Victoria's voice cracked on the admission. She started asking about her father when she was 4, wanted to know why other kids had dads who came to school events and she didn't. I couldn't tell her the truth, but I couldn't completely lie either, so I invented this middle ground. Bedtime stories about a man who built beautiful things, who had kind hands and a good heart, who would have loved her if he'd known she existed. I showed her my tattoo and told her that somewhere in the world was a person with a matching one, someone who carried a piece of her in his heart without knowing it. She closed her eyes. It was the only truth I could give her, and it's haunted me every single night since. Marcus stood abruptly, the need for movement overwhelming his ability to remain still. He paced the length of the study while Victoria watched with an expression that suggested she was calculating the distance to exits. There's more. You said there were things at stake. Plural, what else? Victoria hesitated, then retrieved a manila folder from the desk drawer with the careful handling of someone carrying evidence of their own failures. Emma has a genetic condition, benign so far but requiring monitoring. The doctors have been asking for complete family medical history for 2 years now, paternal lineage specifically, and I've been stalling because I couldn't provide documentation without revealing you existed. She opened the folder to medical records dense with terminology Marcus didn't fully understand. Genetic cardiac arrhythmia. Right now, it's managed with regular checkups and activity restrictions. But if it progresses, they need to know your family's cardiac history to plan appropriate interventions. The words penetrated through Marcus's anger and hurt to trigger a different kind of alarm entirely. My grandfather died of sudden cardiac arrest at 52. My father has a pacemaker, has had it since he was 48. He watched color drain from Victoria's face with something like satisfaction that immediately curdled into shame. You've been treating her blind, letting doctors make decisions without crucial information because you were too scared to tell the truth. I know. Victoria's whisper barely qualified as sound. I know, and it's kept me awake more nights than I can count, running through worst-case scenarios where something happens, and I can't give them the information they need to save her. But the trust conditions meant... She stopped, seemed to recognize how hollow the excuse sounded even to herself. There's no justification. You're right, I was scared, and I made decisions that prioritized money over Emma's well-being, and I will carry that failure until I stop breathing. Marcus closed the folder with more force than necessary. We're telling her. Soon, not in 3 months when it's convenient for your legal protections. Soon. She deserves to know who her father is, and I deserve to be her father, and Lily deserves to know she has a sister. Victoria nodded slowly, something that might have been relief crossing her exhausted features. I agree, but Marcus, there's one more thing. She pulled out a different document, this one clearly prepared by lawyers based on the dense text and official letterhead. There's a deadline clause I haven't mentioned. If Emma doesn't have documented paternity by her 10th birthday, half the trust goes to a foundation for heir identification research. Basically my father's way of ensuring bloodline purity even posthumously. We have until March 14th to establish legal guardianship or Emma loses $100 million that's rightfully hers. The revelation should have shocked him, but Marcus found he'd exceeded his capacity for surprise, had reached some threshold where additional complications just became background noise to the central impossibility of the situation. So we're on a clock, 3 months to tell our daughters that everything they thought they knew about their family is wrong, to establish legal paternity, to somehow make this massive disruption feel like anything other than betrayal. I know how it sounds. Victoria stood as well, closing the distance between them with tentative steps. I know you have every right to hate me, but Marcus, I loved you. Past tense and present tense and every tense in between. I loved you enough to let you go because I knew what staying would cost you. That's not an excuse. It's what I tell myself when the guilt becomes unbearable. Marcus studied her in the low lamplight of the study, this woman who'd made decisions that destroyed and protected him simultaneously, who'd carried the weight of a decade-long secret while he'd built a life in ignorant contentment. He couldn't forgive her yet. Forgiveness required processing he hadn't had time to complete. But he could understand her. And understanding felt like a dangerous first step towards something neither of them was ready to name. Tomorrow. His voice came out firm despite the chaos in his head. Tomorrow, we start figuring out how to co-parent a daughter I just discovered 3 days ago. We build trust, establish routines, let the girls spend time together so when we drop the truth, it doesn't feel like their world is ending. And in 6 weeks, mid-February, we tell them everything, both of them, together so they can process it as sisters instead of separately as confused kids. Relief and terror warred across Victoria's expression before she nodded agreement. 6 weeks, together. The next 2 weeks played out like learning a foreign language through immersion, confused and exhausting, but occasionally punctuated with moments of unexpected fluency. Marcus and Victoria met for coffee while the girls attended school, awkward conversations over cappuccinos, where they negotiated custody arrangements that didn't technically exist yet, and tried to map the territory of their damaged history without detonating any additional explosives. They texted throughout the day with updates that started professional and gradually accumulated personality. Victoria would send photos of Emma practicing violin with commentary about the pieces giving her trouble. Marcus would respond with pictures of the treehouse progress and anecdotes about Lily's running commentary on structural engineering despite having no formal training. Small things, but they built scaffolding that might eventually support more weight. The first official playdate happened on a Friday afternoon when Emma came to Marcus's workshop after school with Catherine hovering like a Secret Service agent assigned to protect national assets. Emma studied the tools with fascination that transcended her sheltered upbringing, asking questions about grain patterns and wood species with vocabulary that suggested extensive independent reading. Marcus taught her to sand properly, safe work that couldn't result in injury even with enthusiastic incompetence, and watched her approach the task with focused determination. "You always this serious about new skills?" He kept his tone light, trying not to project all the complicated emotions churning through his chest onto this child who didn't yet know she was his. Mother says anything worth doing is worth doing correctly. Emma's response came automatically, clearly a phrase she'd heard repeatedly. Then she paused, seemed to reconsider. "But Lily says sometimes it's okay to just try things for fun, even if you're bad at them. I'm not sure which is right." The dichotomy between Victoria's perfectionism and Lily's easy comfort with failure told Marcus everything about how differently his two daughters were being raised. Both are right, actually. Some things need precision, like building load-bearing structures so they don't collapse and hurt people. But other things are better when you just experiment and see what happens. The trick is knowing which kind of situation you're in. Emma considered this while sanding with methodical strokes, then asked with the careful casualness of a child testing boundaries. "Did you build everything in your house?" "Most of it. Building things helps me think through problems." Marcus selected a finer grade sandpaper and showed her the difference in texture. "When my brain gets too noisy, I come out here and work with my hands until the thoughts settle into patterns that make sense." Mother paints when she needs to think. Emma's voice went soft, confessional. "She has a whole studio, but never shows anyone her work. Sometimes I hear her in there late at night and she's crying, but she always says it's allergies when I ask." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. This glimpse into Victoria's private suffering that her daughter was too young to fully contextualize. Connection formed in the space between one sandpaper stroke and the next, built on shared understanding of creating as coping mechanism. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct he recognized from Lily's infancy, clicking into place for this second daughter he was just beginning to know. Saturday brought both families to Marcus's backyard for treehouse construction. Victoria arrived in designer jeans that probably cost $400 and a cashmere sweater that screamed understated luxury, looking profoundly uncomfortable, holding a hammer like it might bite her. Marcus showed her proper grip, hand over hers, calluses against soft skin, and Victoria jerked away as if the contact burned. Tension crackled between them while the girls collaborated on flag designs for their Fortress Castle hybrid, oblivious to the adult complications unfolding 3 feet above their heads. Lily wanted pink, Emma lobbied for purple, and they eventually compromised on both in a pattern that satisfied neither, but demonstrated developing negotiation skills. "You're hovering." Marcus kept his voice low enough that only Victoria could hear while they watched the girls sketch in the dirt. "Let her get messy. A little dirt won't damage her permanently." She has a violin lesson in 3 hours. If she breaks a finger, Victoria caught herself, seemed to hear how paranoid the statement sounded. I know. I know I'm overprotective, but she's all I've had for 9 years. If something happens to her because I was careless, then we'd handle it the same way every parent handles their kid getting hurt, with bandages and ice cream and the knowledge that children are remarkably resilient when we let them be. Marcus stepped back to give her space, recognizing the fear beneath the control. She won't learn to trust her own capabilities if you never let her test limits. Victoria's jaw worked like she was chewing a response too complicated to articulate, but she stepped back incrementally and let Emma hammer a nail without supervision. The nail went in crooked, but Emma's whoop of triumph made Victoria smile despite her obvious anxiety about potential injury. Monday evening brought the first family dinner at Marcus's house. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and salad, but the domesticity felt both familiar and surreal. Victoria arrived with wine expensive enough to make Marcus wince, and they navigated conversation like diplomats from nations with complicated histories. The girls interrupted awkward silences with easy chatter about school and friends and which superhero would win in a fight between Captain America and Thor, blessedly unaware of the weight their parents were carrying. Emma asked about Sarah during dessert with the directness children employ, before they learned certain questions require delicacy. What was Lily's mom like? Lily brightened immediately and ran to grab the photo album she'd apparently staged for this exact inquiry, flipping to pictures of Sarah at various stages, pregnant with Lily, teaching her to ride a bike, in the hospital during one of many treatment cycles, looking exhausted but determined. She was the kindest person. She always said kindness is the bravest thing because it's easy to be mean when you're scared. Emma studied the photos with an intensity that suggested she was trying to extract understanding beyond what the images could convey. She looks like someone who gives good hugs. The best hugs. Lily's voice carried certainty mixed with grief she'd learned to carry without being crushed by. Like being wrapped in a weighted blanket that smells like vanilla because she always wore vanilla perfume. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away rapidly while Marcus excused himself to the kitchen under the pretense of clearing plates. He stood at the sink with his hands braced against the counter, breathing through the complicated grief of missing Sarah while simultaneously grappling with this alternate reality where she'd known about Emma and blessed the deception. When Victoria appeared beside him with her own armload of dishes, they worked in silence that felt companionable despite everything unresolved between them. Wednesday brought Emma's violin recital at a private performing arts center that probably cost more per year than Marcus's mortgage. He sat in the audience surrounded by parents whose clothing budgets exceeded his quarterly income, feeling profoundly out of place in his only suit. Emma played Vivaldi's Winter with technical perfection that would impress professionals, but emotional distance that suggested she was performing rather than feeling the music. Afterward, he found her backstage and pulled her into a hug before his brain caught up to the presumption of the gesture. She stiffened initially, clearly unaccustomed to physical affection from anyone except possibly Victoria, then melted into him with a sigh that sounded like relief mixed with confusion. That was beautiful. You've obviously worked incredibly hard. Marcus kept his voice gentle, trying not to broadcast the intensity of what he was feeling to a 9-year-old who couldn't contextualize it yet. Mother says technique is more important than emotion. Emma's response came muffled against his chest. She says feelings make performances unreliable. Marcus bit back his immediate response about Victoria's control issues and instead said carefully, technique gives you the tools to express emotion accurately. But the emotion is what makes music matter to people who hear it. Both are important. Emma pulled back to look at him with those hazel green eyes that he now saw reflected in his mirror every morning. Has anyone ever hugged you after a performance before? The question seemed to catch her off guard, as if she'd only just realized the absence. No, Mother comes to recitals, but she has to take phone calls from the foundation during intermission, and she says physical affection in public is inappropriate. Emma recited this like quoting scripture, clearly words she'd internalized from repetition. Marcus felt his jaw clench but kept his expression neutral. Well, if it's okay with you, I'd like to make it a regular thing. Hugging you after performances, I mean. If you're comfortable with that. Emma's smile transformed her face from miniature adult to actual child. I'd like that very much. Friday brought the first sleepover at Marcus's house after Victoria finally overruled Catherine's extensive objections about security protocols and appropriate sleeping arrangements. The girls set up sleeping bags in Lily's room and proceeded to stay awake until nearly midnight, whispering secrets and giggling in the way only children approaching that precious edge between childhood and adolescence can manage. Marcus checked on them at 11 and found them still awake, tangled together in Lily's bed instead of their separate sleeping bags, trying to sleep, pretending to sleep, or completely giving up on the concept. Giving up, Lily grinned without shame. We're talking about important stuff, like whether we were supposed to be sisters all along. Emma's voice carried wonder mixed with certainty that bypassed logic entirely. I don't know how it works, but I feel like I knew Lily before I met her, like I'd been waiting to find her. Me too. Lily squeezed Emma's hand with fierce possession. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Marcus had to retreat before the emotion clogging his throat made speech impossible. He stood in the hallway listening to their renewed whispering, understanding with sudden clarity that his daughters had already accepted what their parents were still negotiating. They were family, regardless of blood test results or legal documentation, because they'd chosen each other with the absolute commitment children bring to important decisions. The nightmare came at 2:30 in the morning, Emma screaming with enough volume to wake Marcus from dead sleep 2 rooms away. He reached her before Lily fully woke, pulling her against his chest while she sobbed something about everyone disappearing and being left alone in houses too big to find her way out of. Please don't leave. Please don't disappear. Everyone always disappears. Emma's words came out slurred with sleep and panic, her small body shaking hard enough that Marcus worried about her cardiac condition. Please, Dad, please stay. The title hit Marcus like voltage, every muscle locking with the significance of what she just said unconsciously. He rocked her gently while making soothing sounds that required no actual words, just presence and pressure and the assurance that he wasn't going anywhere. Eventually her breathing steadied and she fell back asleep against his shoulder, while Lily watched from her own bed with an expression suggesting she'd just witnessed something important. Marcus carried Emma back to her sleeping bag and stayed until he was certain she wouldn't wake again, then found Lily still watching him with those two wise eyes. She called you Dad. Lily's whisper carried observation without judgment. In her sleep. I know, baby. Don't mention it to her, okay? She probably won't remember and it might embarrass her. Marcus smoothed Lily's hair back from her forehead with familiar affection. Get some sleep. Morning comes early whether we're ready or not. Sunday brought Victoria to collect Emma with shadows under her eyes suggesting her own restless night. Marcus met her on the back porch while both girls played in the treehouse above them, finally far enough away that adult conversations could happen without concerned eavesdropping. Catherine told me about the nightmare. Thank you for handling it. Victoria's gratitude came wrapped in exhaustion that made her look older than 36, all the years of single parenting and secret keeping visible in the fine lines around her eyes. She's terrified of abandonment. Marcus kept his observation gentle despite the accusation it carried. Has she been in therapy? Since she was 5. We've tried everything. Play therapy, cognitive behavioral work, art therapy, even brief consultation with a child psychiatrist who specialized in attachment disorders. Victoria's hands twisted together in a gesture that betrayed more anxiety than her composed expression. But she knows something's missing. Children are perceptive like that. They can sense the holes in their story even when you're careful to construct seamless narratives around the absence. The admission hung between them while leaves rustled overhead and Emma's laughter drifted down from the treehouse. Marcus wanted to tell Victoria about the title Emma had used unconsciously, but something held him back. A sense that the information was fragile and premature, needed more time to develop before exposure to adult interpretation. Why didn't you ever marry? The question emerged unexpectedly, but Marcus found he needed the answer, needed to understand if there had been other men in Emma's life who'd failed to fill the father-shaped vacancy. 9 years is a long time to be alone. Victoria laughed, but it came out more sad than amused. Because the only man I ever loved, I gave up for his own good. And every man after felt like a betrayal of both of us. Of you because I was trying to replace something irreplaceable. Of Emma because I'd be introducing instability into a life I'd worked so hard to make secure. She stared at her hands like they might contain answers. I dated occasionally when Emma was younger, very casual arrangements that ended the moment anyone suggested meeting my daughter. By the time she was 6, I'd given up pretending I was capable of letting anyone that close again. The confessions settled into Marcus's chest adjacent to all the other complicated feelings he was accumulating about Victoria, anger and understanding, and something that might have been the ghost of old affection, all tangled together too thoroughly to separate into component emotions. Sarah knew, didn't she, that I still had feelings for you? Victoria's head snapped up with surprise. She never said anything about she didn't have to. I think that's why she made you promise to wait until after she was gone. She wanted me to have time to grieve her properly before dealing with. He gestured vaguely at the space between them that contained a decade of complications. All of this. She really was extraordinary. Victoria's voice broke on the word, and Marcus found himself stepping closer without conscious decision, close enough that he could see where tears were threatening to spill over despite her visible efforts at control. They stood like that in fragile detente until the girls' voices calling from above broke the moment, requesting juice boxes and permission to paint the tree house interior before the platform was technically finished. Marcus and Victoria agreed to the chaos, united at least in their willingness to let their daughters make messes in service of joy. Monday brought Marcus to Victoria's gallery opening, a foundation event showcasing emerging artists that required black tie formality Marcus barely managed with his decade-old suit. The fabric pulled tight across shoulders that had broadened from years of manual labor, and he felt every inch the interloper among people who pronounced moe correctly and discussed art with vocabulary that assumed graduate degrees. Victoria introduced him to her board with careful neutrality that somehow made their history more obvious by its absence. This is Marcus Bennett, a skilled craftsman and old friend. The description wasn't inaccurate, but it erased so much context that Marcus had to work to keep his expression pleasant. A woman in a dress that probably cost more than his truck assessed him with barely concealed dismissal. Craftsman? How quaint. Do you do restoration work? Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I build custom furniture and architectural elements, mostly residential projects, but occasionally commercial work when the scope interests me. The conversation moved on without him, like he'd become invisible. These people who controlled wealth and influence, simply editing him out of their awareness once they'd categorized him as beneath notice. He found Victoria an hour later on the terrace where she'd apparently escaped the same social performance exhausting both of them. I don't belong here. Marcus stated it without rancor, just observation of obvious truth. Neither do I. Not really. This is just the costume I wear to justify the money funding Emma's future. Victoria leaned against the railing with her champagne flute held loosely, looking more relaxed than she had inside despite the bitter edge to her words. I hate every second of these events, but they're required maintenance on the foundation that ensures Emma never wants for anything material. And is that why you kept her away from my world? Afraid she'd see how the other half lives and find it appealing? The question came out sharper than Marcus intended, but he was tired of gentle navigation around complicated truths. Victoria flinched like he'd struck her. I kept her away because I was terrified you'd take one look at her and know. And then I'd lose her, lose everything I'd built, lose the only thing in my life that feels real instead of performed. Her voice rose slightly before she caught herself and lowered it again. You say now that you wouldn't have taken her from me. But if you'd known 10 years ago when I was pregnant and you were with Sarah, you would have tried to do the right thing. Split yourself in half trying to be fair to everyone. Made yourself miserable and everyone else collateral damage. Marcus wanted to argue but couldn't because she was absolutely right. At 26, with his first serious relationship since Victoria and a pregnant ex-girlfriend reappearing, he would have destroyed himself trying to satisfy contradictory obligations to people he cared about. Victoria had made the calculation he'd been too young and too committed to noble ideals to make himself. She'd chosen the outcome that caused the least total suffering, even though it concentrated that suffering on her shoulders. So you gave me permission to love Sarah completely. To build a life without you hanging over it like a ghost I couldn't quite exercise. Marcus heard his own words from Victoria's study coming back to him, understanding them differently now. That was your gift to me. For whatever it's worth, yes. Victoria met his eyes with an expression that mixed defiance and apology. I gave you permission to be happy. And you were happy with Sarah, weren't you? Before the cancer, you built something good and real and uncomplicated by divided loyalties. Marcus thought about his marriage, about the years with Sarah that had felt complete in ways his relationship with Victoria never managed, about Lily's arrival and the expansion of his understanding about what family could mean. Victoria wasn't wrong. He'd loved Sarah with a settled certainty that contrasted sharply with the chaos of his feelings for Victoria, had built stability that probably wouldn't have survived the stress of shared custody with an ex who lived across the country. We need to tell them soon. Marcus shifted the conversation deliberately away from the past toward the more immediate crisis. Mid-February, like we discussed, give ourselves time to establish co-parenting routines before we drop the revelation. Victoria's face cycled through several emotions too quickly to catalog before settling on something that looked like acceptance mixed with profound anxiety. 6 weeks from now, February 14th. Valentine's Day? Marcus couldn't help the slight smile at the absurdity. Why not? Might as well lean into the melodrama of emotions and family reveals. Victoria's response carried dark humor that reminded him of the woman he'd known before wealth and secrets transformed her. We'll do it at your house. Neutral territory that's less intimidating than this. She gestured at the gallery behind them, full of original art worth more than most people earned in lifetimes. We tell them together, answer questions as unified parents, and hope that their obvious affection for each other cushions the blow. They shook on it there on the terrace, a formal agreement between two people negotiating the terms of revealing their own failures to the children those failures had created. Marcus felt the shake linger half a second too long, Victoria's palm warm against his, before they both withdrew and pretended the moment hadn't carried significance beyond its practical purpose. Friday brought another sleepover that proceeded smoothly until Marcus checked on the girls at 10 and found them still awake with flashlights, drawing something elaborate across multiple sheets of taped-together paper. Trying to sleep? Pretending to sleep? Or art project? Art project! Both girls announced simultaneously with the eerie synchronization of people who'd known each other much longer than 3 weeks. Marcus stepped closer to examine their work, a family tree rendered in careful pencil with decorative flourishes that showed Emma's trained hand beside Lily's enthusiastic additions. His name occupied a central position, with Sarah's beside it and Lily connected below. But there was a conspicuous blank space where Emma had clearly been trying to figure out how to position her own branch without violating the established structure. We're making a family tree for school. Lily explained the obvious with the patient tone of someone humoring adults who required extra explanation. But we're not sure where to put Mom V. Mom V, the nickname hit Marcus like a hammer to the sternum. This easy diminutive suggesting intimacy neither he nor Victoria had explicitly authorized, but that the girls had apparently decided amongst themselves. Emma was still looking at the tree with a crease between her eyebrows that suggested deeper confusion than simple positioning logistics. Where should Mother go? Is she like an ant? Emma asked with the genuine puzzlement of a child trying to fit irregular pieces into a framework designed for standard shapes. Lily glanced at Marcus with an expression that suggested she had theories she wasn't quite ready to articulate, questions hovering just beneath the surface of her deliberate innocence. Marcus's phone felt heavy in his pocket with the text he needed to send Victoria, the acknowledgement that their carefully planned timeline had just collapsed under the weight of children who'd already intuited truth they weren't supposed to access yet. How about you two work on that tomorrow when you're not exhausted? Marcus kept his voice carefully neutral. It's late and family trees are complicated enough when you're well rested. After he'd extracted promises of actual sleep attempts and closed the door, Marcus stood in the hallway with his phone in hand typing. Emma called me Dad tonight, and they're drawing family trees where placement matters. We're out of time. We need to tell them next weekend. Victoria's response came immediately despite the late hour. Okay, next Saturday. Your house, just the 4 of us. Marcus stared at the screen, then typed, This is going to change everything. Victoria, Everything already changed the moment Emma saw your tattoo in that hardware store. We're just making it official now. Marcus pocketed his phone and checked on the girls one more time through the cracked door. They'd finally settled into sleep, tangled together in Lily's bed with their family tree papers scattered across the floor, like evidence of a mystery they were determined to solve. Emma's hand clutched Lily's even in unconsciousness, holding on like she'd finally found something worth keeping after years of having everything except the one thing that mattered. Some families get built from shared DNA documented in neat genealogical records. Some get constructed from love that refuses to conform to conventional structures. And some get assembled from secrets that children see through before adults find courage to speak truth aloud, from tattoos that mark more than skin, from phoenix wings that learn to fly by burning first. The week crawling toward revelation felt like watching water boil, inevitable but interminable. Monday morning found Marcus and Victoria in a different coffee shop, one farther from both their homes where running into acquaintances seemed less likely. They hunched over cooling cappuccinos with notebooks between them, trying to script the unscriptable. We start with both of them together. Marcus drew circles on the paper that didn't connect into anything useful. No separating them, no preparing one before the other. They face this as sisters, even though they don't know that's what they are yet. Victoria's pen tapped an anxious rhythm against her cup. What if Emma feels betrayed? 9 years of asking about her father, and I've lied every single time. She's 9. She's resilient in ways we've forgotten how to be. Marcus caught Victoria's hand to still the tapping, then released it quickly when the contact felt too intimate for a public space. And she already loves me. She called me dad in her sleep, Victoria. That doesn't just evaporate because the circumstances are complicated. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away with practiced efficiency. I'm terrified she'll hate me for this. Terrified Lily will hate you for having a secret daughter. Terrified we're about to detonate both their lives for the sake of honesty that serves no one except our guilty consciences. Honesty serves Emma when her cardiac condition needs treatment and planning. Honesty serves Lily when she's asking questions about family trees and we keep deflecting. Honesty serves all of us because secrets this big eventually collapse under their own weight. Marcus leaned back, studying the woman across from him who'd carried impossible burdens alone for close to a decade. We're doing this on Saturday. No more delays. Tuesday brought the phone call Marcus had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. His mother answered on the second ring with the slightly breathless quality of someone who'd rushed to grab the receiver before voicemail captured it. Marcus, everything okay? You never called during work hours. Everything's fine. Well, not fine exactly. Mom, I need to tell you something and I need you to not interrupt until I'm finished. He heard her inhale sharply, but to her credit, she stayed silent. You have another granddaughter. Her name is Emma. She's 9 years old. She was born to Victoria, remember her? The one who left for New York? She never told me she was pregnant, and I only found out 3 weeks ago when Emma recognized my tattoo in a hardware store. The silence stretched so long Marcus checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, his mother's voice came through, careful and measured. From before Sarah? Yes, conceived right before Victoria left. She had reasons for not telling me, complicated reasons involving trust funds and conditions about suitable fathers. But the short version is she thought she was protecting everyone by keeping it secret. Marcus delivered the explanation in compressed form, knowing his mother would have questions, but needing to establish the basic facts first. His mother absorbed this for several beats before responding. Does Sarah's family know yet? Not yet. We're telling the girls this Saturday. After Emma and Lily know, I'll call Sarah's parents and explain. Marcus braced for judgment or disappointment, but his mother had never been predictable about these things. Marcus Bennett, you bring that child to meet me. Both your girls, soon. The command carried affection instead of censure, warmth instead of criticism. And Marcus? Thank Victoria for keeping her safe when you couldn't. That took courage even if the circumstances were all wrong. Marcus ended the call with his throat tight, grateful for grace he didn't entirely deserve. Wednesday found Victoria in her lawyer's office, reviewing documents that would reshape her daughter's legal status and inheritance protections. The attorney spread paperwork across his mahogany desk with the careful handling of someone who'd seen families implode over lesser revelations. Once Marcus signs these paternity acknowledgement forms and you file them with the trust administrators, Emma's inheritance becomes protected regardless of any challenges to your fitness as a parent. He tapped the relevant sections with a gold pen that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week. But you understand, this makes Marcus a legal co-guardian with equal say in all major decisions: education, medical care, religious upbringing, everything. Victoria signed her name with steady precision, despite the magnitude of what she was authorizing. I understand. That's how it should have been from the beginning. The lawyer's eyebrows rose fractionally. Most people in your position would fight to maintain sole custody and control. You're essentially volunteering to share power you currently hold completely. I've had sole control for 9 years, and it nearly destroyed all of us. Victoria dated the signature and pushed the documents back across the desk. Emma deserves 2 parents. I'm just correcting my mistake as well as circumstances allow. Thursday afternoon in Marcus's workshop, Emma worked on sanding a cabinet panel with focus that bordered on meditative. She'd improved dramatically in 3 weeks. Her strokes now even and confident instead of tentative. Marcus worked beside her on a drawer assembly, companionable silence, occasionally punctuated by questions about technique or wood properties. Marcus? Emma's voice carried the careful quality she used when approaching topics that mattered. Can I ask you something? Anything, sweetheart. The endearment slipped out without conscious authorization but felt right in a way that made his chest ache. Emma set down her sandpaper with deliberate care. Do you think my father, my real father, would like me if he knew I existed? The question hit Marcus like a chisel to the sternum, all the air leaving his lungs in a rush. He put down his own tools and sat beside her on the workshop floor, choosing words with the precision he applied to joinery. Emma, any man would be incredibly lucky and proud to have you as his daughter. You're brilliant, kind, talented, and brave in ways most adults never manage. But he doesn't know I exist. Emma's voice went small, vulnerable in ways her usual careful composure never allowed. Mother said he had his own life and was happy without us, that telling him would only hurt people for no good reason. Marcus felt his heart crack cleanly down the middle. Sometimes adults make decisions because they think they're protecting people they love. Those decisions might seem right at the time, but look different when circumstances change. Emma studied him with those hazel green eyes that were mirrors of his own, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Do you think I'll ever meet him? Do you think he'd want to know me if he could? Marcus pulled her against his side in a hug that felt simultaneously natural and presumptuous. Yeah, kiddo, I think you'll meet him very soon. And I think he'll want to know you more than almost anything else in the world. Friday evening brought the last family dinner before Truth dismantled their careful pretense. Victoria arrived at Marcus's house with expensive wine and visible anxiety, her hands trembling slightly as she helped set the table while the girls played upstairs. They moved around each other in the kitchen with growing familiarity, passing dishes and utensils with minimal verbal coordination. Last meal before everything changes. Victoria poured wine into glasses with hands that steadied through force of will. I keep thinking about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Marcus stopped her before she could lift the glass, taking the bottle and setting it aside. Victoria, look at me. She did, reluctantly, and he saw every fear she'd been accumulating for 9 years visible in her expression. Those girls love each other. They love us. That doesn't change tomorrow. The truth might be hard, but it's also a gift. We're giving them the family they've both been missing without knowing what was absent. Marcus kept his voice low and steady, willing her to believe it. Everything else is just logistics we'll figure out together. When did you become so wise about impossible situations? Victoria's attempt at lightness couldn't quite mask the genuine question underneath. When I had to explain to Lily why her mother was dying despite doing everything right, despite being the kindest person we knew. Marcus thought about those conversations, about learning to deliver devastating news with honesty that didn't destroy hope. You learn fast that painful truth beats comfortable lies every single time. From upstairs came the girls' laughter, unfiltered joy that reminded both adults what they were fighting to protect. Victoria's shoulders dropped fractionally from their defensive height as she let herself lean against the counter beside Marcus, close but not quite touching. Thank you. Her whisper barely qualified as sound. For not hating me, for giving Emma what I couldn't, for being willing to do this the hard way instead of fighting me for custody or making it ugly. This isn't about us. Mom, Marcus stated it simply, truth without embellishment. It's about Emma and Lily getting to be sisters. Everything else is just noise we have to manage so they can have what we're giving them. Saturday arrived with perfect February weather that felt like mockery, bright sunshine and gentle breeze, while Marcus's stomach churned with anticipatory dread. He'd made cookies the night before, a batch of chocolate chip that now sat on the counter like edible proof of normalcy in a situation that was anything but. Victoria arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, punctuality as armor against chaos, and they faced each other across the kitchen island like generals planning an invasion that couldn't be avoided, only managed. Ready? Marcus asked, despite knowing neither of them would ever be ready for this conversation. No, but we're doing it anyway. Victoria squared her shoulders in a gesture Marcus recognized from business meetings and difficult decisions, preparing herself for impact she couldn't prevent. They called the girls down from the treehouse where they'd been adding unauthorized decorative elements to the platform. Emma and Lily entered together as they always did now, gravitating toward each other with the magnetism of siblings who'd found each other after years of searching they didn't know they'd been conducting. They sensed the adult tension immediately, both girls' expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as they registered the setup. Parents positioned formally, cookies untouched, an air of occasion that felt ominous. Emma straightened her shoulders in unconscious mimicry of Victoria's posture, while Lily moved closer to Emma in protective instinct. They arranged themselves on the couch side by side, unified front against whatever serious thing was about to happen, and Marcus felt his chest constrict at their unconscious solidarity. He sat on the coffee table at their eye level, Victoria beside him, both parents facing the inquisition they'd constructed for themselves. Girls, we need to talk to you about something very important. Something we should have told you before, but we made mistakes. Lily's eyes went wide with the particular anxiety of children who've learned that adult mistakes often impact them most severely. What kind of mistakes? With us, Victoria took over with voice that shook despite her attempts at control. The kind where grown-ups think they're protecting people they love, but actually just make everything more complicated than it needed to be. Emma had gone very still with that unreadable expression Marcus was learning meant she was processing at high speed, running calculations about what information was coming and how it would reshape her understanding of reality. Are you and Marcus getting married? Both adults startled at the assumption. Marcus recovered first. No, sweetheart, this isn't about that. The pause stretched like taffy, elastic and uncomfortable, until Marcus met Victoria's eyes and received her nod of permission to proceed. He took a breath that felt inadequate for the words that needed speaking. Lily, you know how you've always said you wished you had a sister? His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by emotion he couldn't quite contain. Lily nodded slowly, suspicion creeping into her expression alongside hope she was clearly afraid to trust. Marcus felt his throat close around the revelation, but forced the words through anyway. Well, baby, you do. You have a sister. Emma is your sister. Absolute silence filled the living room like a physical substance, thick enough to measure density and weight. Lily looked at Emma. Emma stared at Marcus. Both girls' brains visibly struggled to process information that didn't fit the frameworks they'd been given to understand their lives. Lily spoke first, her 8-year-old logic trying to construct bridges across impossible gaps. But how can Emma be my sister? She has a different mom than me. Victoria's turn now, voice shaking despite her visible efforts at composure. Emma, honey, remember the stories I told you about your father? The kind man who builds beautiful things with his hands? Emma's face began to change, cycling through confusion toward hope, towards something that looked dangerous and desperate in its intensity. Her gaze locked onto Marcus with laser focus. The man I told you about. Victoria's voice broke, but she pushed through. He's Marcus, Lily's dad. He's your father too. And time executed that strange expansion it does during catastrophic revelations, each second stretching to contain decades of implications. Emma stared at Marcus while her mind raced through evidence she'd been unconsciously collecting. puzzle pieces clicking into place with audible precision. The tattoo, the eyes, the way he'd known exactly how to comfort her during nightmares. The instant sense of recognition she'd felt, but couldn't name. "You're him?" Emma's whisper barely carried across the space between them. "You're the one from the stories?" Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice to cooperate with speech. Emma's volume increased as reality overtook shock. "You're my dad?" "Yes." "You're the phoenix who learned to fly?" Her voice rose towards something between laughter and tears, 9 years of longing finding sudden resolution. "Yes, baby, I'm him." Emma launched herself off the couch with enough force that Marcus barely managed to catch her before momentum carried them both backward. She wrapped around him with desperate strength, small body shaking with sobs that felt like purging years of accumulated grief. "I knew it. When I saw the tattoo, I knew. Mother, I told you I knew." Marcus held her while she cried, his own tears falling unchecked onto her dark curls. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't know about you. I would have been there from the beginning. I swear to you, I would have been there." Emma pulled back just enough to touch his face with small hands, as if confirming his solidity. "You really didn't know?" "I really didn't know. Your mother had reasons, good reasons, that made sense to her. But I promise you I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Not ever." Lily had been watching this exchange with tears streaming down her face. But now she found her voice with dawning joy that transformed her expression. "So Emma is my sister? My real sister?" Victoria pulled Lily onto her lap despite the 8-year-old's size, gentleness in every movement. "Yes, sweetheart, your real sister. Same father, different mothers, but absolutely sisters." Lily's grin could have powered electrical grids. She catapulted off Victoria's lap to join the embrace Marcus was still sharing with Emma, wrapping her arms around both of them. "I have a sister!" The three of them tangled together on the floor, Marcus and both his daughters, crying and laughing in equal measure, while Victoria watched from the couch with tears she no longer attempted to hide. Emma noticed after several moments, reaching out one hand in invitation. "Mother, come here, please." Victoria hesitated, clearly uncertain of her welcome after the magnitude of what she concealed. Emma's hand stayed extended, insistent, until Victoria slid off the couch to join them. The circle completed itself, all four bound together by love and lies and the messy truth that families get built from, both in unpredictable ratios. Eventually they migrated to the kitchen table where cookies finally found their purpose. The girls' questions came rapid fire, overlapping each other in their eagerness for information that had been withheld too long. Lily led with the practical. "Why didn't we know before? Why did Emma's mom keep it secret?" Marcus and Victoria exchanged glances, negotiating wordlessly how much truth to share with children who deserved honesty, but also age-appropriate filtering. Victoria spoke carefully. "When I found out I was pregnant with Emma, your mom, Sarah, was still alive. I was scared that telling Marcus would hurt her, would hurt all of you. So I made a choice to raise Emma alone." Lily processed this with visible concentration. "Did my mom know?" Victoria nodded. "Eventually, yes. She and I talked about it. She told me to wait until you were old enough to handle complicated information. She was really smart about stuff like that." Lily's voice carried certainty mixed with the grief that still ambushed her at unexpected moments. She always knew the right time for hard conversations. Emma turned to Marcus with vulnerability visible in every line of her posture. "Can I call you Dad? Or is that just for Lily?" Marcus's vision blurred with fresh tears. "Emma, you already called me Dad, last week during the sleepover when you had a nightmare, and hearing it was the best thing that's happened to me in years." Emma didn't remember but smiled anyway, testing the word consciously now. "Dad?" "Yeah, sweetheart." "Dad!" Louder this time, joy breaking through caution. "I'm right here." "Dad!" Emma's shout carried pure delight, and Lily immediately joined in, both girls calling the title repeatedly until Marcus was laughing and crying simultaneously, holding them while they claimed him verbally in a way that transcended any legal documentation. Emma's expression shifted abruptly to concern. "Wait, does this mean I have to move? Leave Mother?" Victoria's response came fierce and immediate. "No, never. You're mine. You're his, you're ours. We figure this out together as family. Marcus added reassurance with equal intensity. You have two homes now, here in your mom's house. You spend time with both of us. We share you. That's how this works. Relief washed across Emma's features before practical considerations reasserted themselves. So I can sleep over whenever I want. Victoria and Marcus answered in stereo, yes. Both girls exchanged satisfied looks and executed a complicated handshake that suggested they'd been planning contingencies for this exact scenario. Emma's next question came with careful hesitation. Dad, she paused to savor the word, testing how it felt in her mouth. Do I have other family? Grandparents? Marcus smiled despite the emotional exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. You have my parents in Florida. They already know about you and can't wait to meet you. And you have Sarah's parents too, Lily's grandparents. They're your grandparents now as well. Wonder spread across Emma's face as family expanded in real time, all the relationships she'd been missing suddenly manifesting through revelation. Lily leaned into Emma's side with comfortable possession. Grandma Sarah makes the best snickerdoodles. You're going to love her. Emma turned back to Marcus, then to Victoria, then to both parents with sudden seriousness. There's something I need to tell you about why Mother was scared to tell you about me. Victoria's face went pale with alarm. Emma, we don't need to discuss. Yes, we do. He's my dad now. Dad. He should know. Emma pulled up her sleeve to reveal the medical alert bracelet Marcus had noticed before, but not questioned. I have a heart condition. Genetic. The doctor said they need my father's medical history to treat it right. Mother's been scared because she couldn't give them information without telling you I exist. Marcus's blood went cold despite the warm room. What kind of condition? Victoria took over with visible relief at not having to explain alone. Genetic cardiac arrhythmia, benign so far but requiring monitoring. The doctors have been insisting on paternal genetic history for 2 years, and I've been stalling because I couldn't provide it without revealing everything. Marcus delivered the information that made Victoria's remaining color drain completely. My grandfather died of sudden cardiac arrest at 52. My father has had a pacemaker since 48. I have complete medical records going back 3 generations on my dad's side. Oh God. Victoria's whisper carried every fear she'd been suppressing. Oh God, I didn't know. I've been letting them treat her without crucial information because I was too much of a coward to... Stop! Marcus cut her off before guilt could spiral into something destructive. We fix it now. Tomorrow I call my dad for his cardiologist's information. Get my own records from my doctor. Compile everything Emma's doctors need. We're not looking backward at what we can't change. We're looking forward at what we can fix. Emma looked between her parents with an expression suggesting she was seeing them clearly for the first time. So you're not just my dad, you're also my medical history. Marcus managed a smile despite the fear churning in his gut. Yeah, kiddo, the good and the bad, all of it's yours now. The following week blurred into a series of appointments and legal procedures that transformed emotional truth into documentation the world would recognize. Monday brought DNA testing at a lab, where technicians swabbed cheeks with practiced efficiency while Emma asked technical questions about genetic markers and probability percentages. The results would take a week, but no one doubted what they'd confirm. Tuesday, Marcus sat in Emma's cardiologist's office with Victoria beside him and 3 generations of medical records spread across the desk. The doctor reviewed them with increasing focus, making notes that would reshape Emma's treatment protocol. This changes everything. With this family history, we can implement preventive measures and monitoring that we couldn't justify before. He looked at Marcus with something approaching gratitude. You may have just added years to your daughter's life by providing this information. Wednesday, the trust lawyer processed paperwork that established Marcus as legal co-guardian, his signature authorizing changes that Victoria had once feared would strip her of control. The lawyer watched them sign with barely concealed surprise at the lack of conflict, clearly expecting custody battles that never materialize. Thursday brought parent-teacher conferences where Marcus attended as Emma's official father for the first time. Her teacher commented on changes visible over recent weeks, Emma laughing more easily, volunteering answers instead of waiting to be called on, engaging with classmates during recess instead of reading alone on benches. Something's different at home. The teacher's observation came with a smile. She's lighter somehow, happier. Victoria and Marcus exchanged glances before Victoria answered simply. She found her father. The teacher's expression softened with understanding. That explains everything. New routines established themselves with surprising speed. Monday through Wednesday, Emma stayed with Victoria, Marcus joining them for dinner twice a week. Thursday through Saturday, Emma lived with Marcus while Victoria came for Friday evening meals. Sundays alternated between houses with all four together, regardless of location. The girls negotiated a standing Saturday sleepover that rotated homes weekly, neither willing to miss a night of whispered confidences and planning. The first serious challenge arrived mid-February when Lily found Marcus in his workshop at midnight, tears streaming down her face in quantities that suggested she'd been crying for some time before seeking him out. He pulled her onto his lap without questions, waiting for her to find words for whatever was breaking her heart. "You have two daughters now." Lily's voice came out small and scared in ways she rarely allowed anymore. "Does that mean you love me there?" Marcus felt his own heart crack at the question, at the vulnerability she'd been carrying alone until it became unbearable. "Lily Bennett, look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "Love doesn't divide, it multiplies. I don't have less love for you because Emma exists. I have more love total. And you, my first baby, my Lily girl, you're the one who taught me how to be a father. Nothing changes that. You're permanent in my heart in ways that don't shift when circumstances change." "Promise?" The word came out desperate, needing reassurance in ways that transcended logic. "I promise on everything I am. You're my North Star. You always will be." He held her until her tears subsided, until her breathing steadied, until she felt secure enough to return to bed. Emma appeared in the workshop doorway minutes later, having clearly overheard from wherever she'd been lurking. "Am I your North Star too?" Marcus opened his arms and Emma crossed the space to be included in comfort she was still learning to accept. He held both daughters against his chest while they fit themselves around him. "You're both my North Stars. You guide me together. That's how navigation works. You triangulate from multiple fixed points to find your way. I need both of you to know where I'm going." Victoria had her own moment of vulnerability when she broke down crying over dishes after a Friday dinner, overwhelmed by watching Emma run to Marcus first when excited about a good grade on her math test. Marcus found her in the kitchen attempting to hide tears behind aggressive cleaning. "I've been her only parent for 9 years. Victoria's voice shook despite attempts at control. "Now she runs to you first, calls for you during nightmares, shows you her accomplishments before showing me. I'm losing her." Marcus moved closer but didn't touch, respecting the boundaries she still needed. "You're not losing her. She's gaining. Victoria, look at me." He waited until she did. "Emma adores you. You gave her everything, stability, education, safety, love that sustained her through years of having one parent when she needed two. I'm just adding to what you built. I'm not replacing anything." "You make it sound simple." Victoria's laugh came out wet and broken. "It's not simple. It's complicated and messy, and we'll probably screw it up 50 more times before we get it right." Marcus handed her a dish towel, practical gesture toward recovery. "But we keep trying because that's what parents do for their kids. We figure it out." Early March brought completion of the treehouse project that had been gestating since Emma and Lily first met. All four worked together on final touches, Marcus teaching proper finishing techniques, Victoria contributing design elements that elevated functionality into art. Both girls are adding unauthorized decorative flourishes that made the structure more playground than architectural statement. They carved initials into the support beam with ceremony that felt significant beyond the simple act. MB plus VH plus EB plus LB, connected by plus signs that suggested addition instead of division, multiplication of love instead of fractional distribution. Marcus hung the sign the girls had painted together, Emma and Lily's castle, built by Dad, designed by Mom 5, with mounting brackets that would survive weather and time. Emma and Lily stood back to admire their collaboration, arms around each other's shoulders in poses that mirrored each other unconsciously. This treehouse is special. Marcus kept his voice casual, despite the emotion threatening his composure. You know why? Both girls looked at him with expectant attention. Emma answered first. Because it's really well built? Because it has the best design ever? Lily contributed hopefully. Marcus smiled at both answers before delivering his actual point. Because it was built by people who didn't know they were family at first, and now they do. This isn't just a treehouse. It's proof that family can get built from love, even when circumstances tried to keep it separated. Emma wrapped her arms around Marcus's waist with fierce possession. Best family ever. Lily joined from the other side. Even if it's complicated. Victoria watched from a safe distance, something complicated moving across her features. Especially because it's complicated. Easy doesn't teach you anything. March 14th arrived with perfect weather and carefully concealed anxiety. Emma's 10th birthday and the deadline that had been driving decisions for months materialized as a combined celebration in Marcus's backyard. For the first time in her life, Emma had a party with more than 2 guests. Lily had invited school friends, Marcus had arranged for both sets of grandparents to attend, and Victoria had abandoned her usual control in favor of letting others plan. The gathering felt less like a birthday party and more like a family reunion, acknowledging people who'd always been connected, finally recognizing the connections explicitly. Marcus's parents arrived first, his mother pulling Emma into a hug that suggested she'd been storing it up for the 9 years she'd been prevented from offering it. You look exactly like your father at this age. Same stubborn chin. Marcus's mother held Emma's face with gentle hands, studying her like memorizing features she'd been denied access to for too long. Emma grinted without self-consciousness. Dad says I get my stubbornness from mother. Marcus's mother turned to Victoria with expression that could have gone several directions. Thank you for keeping her safe when he couldn't. That took strength, even if everything about it was wrong. Victoria's face crumpled slightly before she regained control. I thought you'd hate me for what I did. Hate you? You protected my granddaughter. You raised her to be this incredible child standing here. Your family now, whether the circumstances were ideal or not. The embrace that followed carried forgiveness Victoria clearly hadn't expected to receive. Sarah's parents arrived with visible emotional complexity, greeting Marcus with hugs before turning to Emma with expressions that mixed grief and wonder. Sarah's mother knelt to Emma's eye level, despite the strain on her knees. Our Sarah would have loved you. She always wanted Lily to have a sister. Emma studied the woman carefully, clearly trying to extract understanding about someone she'd never meet, but whose presence had shaped everything. Lily told me about her. She sounds like she was really special. She was. Sarah's father's voice roughened with emotion he didn't try to hide. And she'd be so happy seeing this family together. She always said love finds ways to multiply, even when loss makes you think it can only subtract. Lily materialized beside Emma, claiming her sister's hand with familiar possession. Mom told Dad to be happy after she died. I think this is what she meant. The party proceeded with chaos and laughter, children running through the yard while adults congregated in clusters of conversation that acknowledged complex histories without dwelling in them. Marcus called everyone to attention as the cake, 3 layers Victoria had somehow managed to bake without catastrophic failure, got wheeled out with candles blazing. He raised his juice box and toast, feeling the weight of every eye on him. 10 years ago, I didn't know Emma existed. 9 years ago, I was building a life with Sarah that felt complete. 2 years ago, I lost Sarah and thought family meant just me and Lily going forward. He paused, letting memory and gratitude compete for space in his throat. Then 3 months ago, a little girl pointed at my tattoo in a hardware store and changed everything. Emma beamed at him from the center of attention, surrounded by friends and family in quantities she'd never experienced before today. Emma, you're the best surprise of my life. You and Lily together. You're everything I didn't know I needed but can't imagine existing without. His gaze shifted to include Victoria. And Victoria, thank you for keeping her safe, for raising someone extraordinary, for trusting me with her now when you had every reason not to. We don't have a traditional family, but we have a real one, and that's worth more than conventional. Victoria raised her glass with hands that mostly stayed steady. To Emma, who taught us all that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when you're terrified of what it might cost. Emma climbed onto the picnic bench, small but commanding. To having two houses, two sets of grandparents, two parents who actually like each other, and one sister who's my best friend forever. The toast echoed across the yard with joy that felt earned rather than automatic. Happiness built from truth instead of comfortable lies. Later, after guests departed and light faded toward evening, four people climbed into the treehouse for private celebration. Emma announced it definitively the best birthday of her life, while Lily argued it was the best day period, no qualifiers needed. Victoria and Marcus sat with their backs against opposite walls, watching their daughters exist in each other's orbit with the ease of siblings who'd always known each other despite only 3 months of actual acquaintance. "I'm sorry it took so long." Victoria's apology came quiet enough that the girls wouldn't overhear. "Sorry for all the years you missed, for all the moments you should have been there for but couldn't, because I was too scared to do the right thing." Emma turned at the words despite their low volume, children's hearing apparently supersonic when adult conversations turned important. "Mother, I'm not mad. I understand now why you did it. And look," she gestured at Marcus, at Lily, at the treehouse surrounding them. "Everything turned out okay. We're together now, and that's what matters." Marcus met Victoria's eyes across the small space, recognition passing between them that they'd somehow managed to avoid completely destroying their children despite catastrophic choices and kept secrets. Not through skill or planning, but through the resilient grace of kids who loved more easily than adults, who adapted faster than their parents, who'd already forgiven what the adults were still processing. 6 months later, September arrived with crisp air and new beginnings that felt symbolic enough to be fictional, except they were happening in measurable reality. Emma's first day at Lily's public school, her choice after a summer of begging to leave private education for something that felt more like actual childhood, brought both girls to the bus stop in matching nervousness. "You sure you'll fit in?" Lily asked for the dozenth time that morning, anxiety she'd been suppressing finally breaking through. "You're my sister. That's all anyone needs to know." Emma's certainty carried weight her previous life had never allowed. "Besides, I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not for people who only care about money." Victoria had sold the massive estate, moved into a loft closer to Marcus's neighborhood where she could walk to his house in 10 minutes. The downsizing felt liberating rather than restrictive. Less space to maintain meaning, more time for living in it. Wednesday afternoons found all four in Marcus's workshop, both girls learning advanced joinery while Victoria attempted basic carpentry with mixed results and persistent determination. Emma worked on a bookshelf for her room at Marcus's house, while Lily built a matching one, and someone suggested they should make one for Victoria and one for Sarah's grave, so all the mothers got equal treatment. Marcus had to step outside for several minutes while tears ambushed him with their intensity. Victoria found him on the porch, said nothing, just stood beside him in solidarity that required no words. Saturday morning brought the four of them to Sarah's grave with fresh flowers and a bookshelf Marcus and the girls had built together. Emma knelt beside the headstone, touching it gently like greeting someone she wished she'd known. "Hi, I'm Emma, Lily's sister and Dad's other daughter. I wish I'd met you." She paused as if listening for response that wouldn't come. "But Lily tells me stories about you all the time, and Dad says you knew about me before you died. Thank you for telling Mother to wait for the right time. I think the timing was actually perfect." Lily joined her at the grave, both girls arranging flowers with careful attention. Marcus and Victoria stood back, giving them space for grief and gratitude that transcended adult complications. She really was extraordinary. Victoria's whisper acknowledged what she'd been too threatened to admit during Sarah's life. Yeah, she was. Marcus agreed simply, truth that required no elaboration. The final Saturday of September brought them full circle to Patterson Hardware, where Marcus shopped with both daughters for supplies to expand the treehouse. Emma measured lumber with practiced competence, while Lily compared paint colors with artistic consideration, both wearing matching Bennett Builders t-shirts Marcus had made specially. The store employee who'd witnessed that first impossible meeting months ago paused in passing. "Beautiful daughters you have." Marcus wrapped his arms around both their shoulders with pride that felt earned through trial. "Thank you." They're pretty incredible. They look just like you. The employee's observation carried warmth that suggested he remembered the earlier encounter, had perhaps guessed some of what had unfolded since. Yeah, they do. Marcus accepted the truth with gratitude for circumstances that had brought recognition despite every obstacle. Emma spotted a woman with a young child and pointed excitedly. Lily, look! That little girl has a phoenix tattoo just like Dad's. Lily squinted before laughing. Emma, that's a butterfly. Oh, Emma studied it more carefully. Right, still cool though. They moved toward checkout together, Marcus's hands on both their shoulders, family by biology, and choice in ratios that didn't require calculating anymore. His phoenix tattoo caught light as he reached for his wallet, those wings spread in eternal flight that now meant more than the original symbolism intended. Some phoenixes burn and rise alone, learning flight through solitary struggle. Some find each other and learn to soar in tandem, wings catching updrafts together. And some build families from ashes and secrets, from second chances and children who recognize each other before adults find courage to speak truth aloud. From tattoos that mark more than skin, from love that multiplies instead of divides. Marcus's family was all three versions simultaneously, and that was enough. That was everything.